Okay, hello everyone. I'd like to officially welcome you all to today's webinar, Managing Up, Navigating the VISTA Supervisor Relationship. My name is Jessica Knight, and I'm a training advisor working with the Corporation for National and Community Service. And I will also be helping host and facilitate some of the Q&A at the end. Also joining us today is Andy Clark from Education Northwest, who is helping behind the scenes with some of the WebEx technology, so you may see her in the chat and Q&A. So, like I said before, my name is Jessica, and I'm filling in for Eric Powell, a training coordinator with VISTA, who is not able to join us today, so that's not me, obviously. But I'd like to welcome our main speaker for today, Signa Bishop. Signa has been working in the training and development field in higher education, nonprofit, and national service settings for the last 10 years. She holds a master's degree in education and a certificate in intercultural training and development from Portland State University. And before joining Oregon Health and Science University in 2013 to work on leadership development, and she works training managers and is a manager herself, so she's got lots of experience on this topic. But before that, Signa worked for several nonprofits, recruiting volunteers, engaging students in service, running college access programs, and managing AmeriCorps programs. Signa actually got her professional start as an AmeriCorps VISTA. So I would like to officially welcome her and turn over the presentation to Signa.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here to discuss best practices for managing up, or in other words, as we like to say, how to communicate effectively in order to develop a strong and productive working relationship with your VISTA supervisor. As Jessica mentioned, I served as a VISTA myself and then went on to serve as a VISTA leader and also a VISTA program director. So I'm really pretty familiar with many of the challenges that come up between VISTAs and their supervisors throughout the service year. I might not go so far as to say that I've heard it all, but I do feel pretty comfortable saying that I've heard a lot. Likewise, in my current position, I work with supervisors and I'm also in a supervisory role. But, you know, supervisors are folks just like your VISTA supervisors, and I help them build their leadership and management skills as part of my leadership training component of my work. So I can provide some perspective on what your supervisor might be thinking or where they're coming from, and hopefully this will help you better understand the supervisor role in general, as well as what might be going on with your supervisor and what managing up strategies might be most effective with them. So this presentation is designed to help you identify methods for building successful professional relationships, assist you to develop strategies to communicate your needs to your supervisor in a more clear and specific way, and identify VISTA resources to support you in the workplace challenges you may be experiencing. We'll also explore ways to address some of the common communication challenges that VISTAs face while navigating their service year, provide practical solutions for improving communication, as well as bust some common myths about managing up. So I want to just pause for a moment before we dive into the content for this session, because I really want to hear from you all first. My question to you all is, what comes to mind when you hear the term managing up? Please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure to send to all participants. We want your comments to be visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not the Q&A panel further down the screen.
And again, for those of you who have joined us on webinars before, you may notice that WebEx looks a little different. So again, if you're not seeing that chat panel, put your cursor at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom of the slides, and there should be a little speech bubble icon that will activate that panel. So we've got Catherine saying managing up manifests and me reminding my boss of commitments that we've made.
All right, nice.
Taking responsibility, initiating communication with your supervisor.
Oh, cool. That's a great answer.
Asserting yourself and taking initiative, not waiting for top-down solutions. Yeah, I hear initiative coming up quite a bit. Joseph, the original question is, what comes to mind when you hear the term managing up? Stepping up to complete tasks, managing your relationships with those who are managing you, Great. These are all great, and we're gonna unpack these a little bit further.
Cool. This is awesome. These are overwhelmingly positive responses, which is great. We've done this webinar a couple times before, and it seems like the tenor of responses this time is maybe on the more positive side, which is awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. So hopefully we can dive into this a little bit deeper and keep that positivity going throughout the presentation. So thanks for those responses. And I want to spend just the next few minutes discussing what I mean when I say managing up, so we'll define it a little bit. And then, of course, we're going to get into some myth-busting around the practice of managing up. So in their article, Managing Your Boss, Drs. Thomas Zuber and Erica James write that managing up is the process of consciously working with your boss to obtain the best possible results for you, your boss, and your organization. This is not political maneuvering or kissing up. Rather, it's a deliberate effort to bring understanding and cooperation to a relationship between individuals who often have different perspectives. So in other words, managing up is not a bad thing. And really, the heart of managing up is all about communicating well, which was definitely echoed in your chat responses. It's also about advocating for yourself so that you can be happy, productive, and have an awesome professional relationship with your supervisor. So let's dive deeper into some of the common myths surrounding managing up. I didn't really see any of these in your chat comments, but these have definitely come up before and are echoed in some of the managing up research. So we'll dive a little bit deeper and see if any of these things resonate with you. So myth number one, managing up is telling my supervisor how to do their job. Not so. Managing up is all about communicating, asking questions, and clarifying expectations to foster a productive working relationship. It's also about creating a shared understanding of projects, timelines, direction, and vision, which ensures that you're able to meet your supervisor's expectations. Likewise, your relationship with your supervisor is about collaborating to maximize outcomes, which you can do better together. So really, managing up is about being easy to supervise. I think it's important to emphasize that the VISTA supervisor relationship, like any relationship, is a partnership. It's about doing your part to make sure you're aligned with your supervisor's expectations and the goals of the organization that you're serving with as a VISTA member. So myth number two is, it's my supervisor's job to manage, so I don't have to. Well, believe it or not, very few supervisors have actually been taught how to manage, and they appreciate your help and guidance. Also, even though you may not manage other people at this moment, you're in charge of yourself. Yes, you do have a supervisor, but a sense of personal leadership and initiative goes a long way and will help you be a better learner and worker. Personal leadership means that you help others work with you, you collaborate, and you communicate well so that others know how to help you succeed. Myth number three, I could never manage my supervisor. That sounds hard. So suspicions aside, the truth is that your supervisor cannot read your mind and they don't know everything, which probably you figured out by now. Seriously though, managers I work with regularly tell me that sometimes they feel like they don't know what they're doing in their leadership roles. Supervisors definitely experience imposter syndrome as well. Also, in my leadership training work, managers often tell me that it's easier if the people they supervise actually communicate their needs and advocate for themselves. So believe it or not, managing people is really hard, and managers struggle a lot with that kind of difficult work. Some of the common challenges they experience include delegating, giving constructive feedback, focusing on the big picture, projecting confidence, and perhaps, surprisingly, getting support from above, or managing up, in other words. In fact, one of the topics I teach managers in my classes is how to manage up to their directors, department administrators, and vice presidents. It seems a bit crazy, but supervisors have the same questions and challenges around managing up as many of you do. But the bottom line is that you are smart. They selected you for this project because they had confidence in your abilities, and they need you, and they're relying on you to help them help you be successful. So let's spend a minute addressing some common challenges. We're going to ask another chat question. what managing up challenges are you currently experiencing? So please respond in the chat box and make sure you send to all participants.
All right, so again, what type of managing up challenges are you experiencing? All right, a clear vision for the program and its development. That's a bigger picture question for sure. Knowing who is my supervisor. Yes, a common VISTA challenge sometimes. Wanting to dive in rather than observing first. Clear expectations. Keeping the role focused. Let's see.
Yeah, hearing some themes around micromanagement maybe.
Scheduling, communication differences, lack of guidance. Great, okay, well, or not great, they're challenges, but they're opportunities for us to talk more about this, and I think we are going to address most of these, and any challenges that we don't address, keep those in your mind, save them for the Q&A at the end, and we can unpack those a little further at the end.
For sure. So I definitely see some themes that have come up, and there aren't a ton of things that came up in the chat that are super surprising to me. So we're going to dive just a little bit deeper into some of these challenges, and we'll kind of take them one by one and go through some of them. And again, but if there's something that doesn't come up that you want to ask at the end in the Q&A, we'd love to hear it. Okay, so our first challenge is my supervisor is super busy and doesn't have time for me. This is a really common challenge experienced by VISTAs, and it's a challenge experienced by most people who have a supervisor. Whether it's because they have a big job, they're part-time, they're covering for other staff, or all of the above, supervisors are some of the busiest people around. The bottom line is that the bottom line for them is that managing by meeting and communicating with the people that they supervise is their job. So they really should be doing this. However, there are only 24 hours in a day, so how can you make this work considering that we're all strapped for time and resources? Okay, so first, you need to actually ask for a meeting. So if your supervisor is super busy and doesn't have time for you, you need to really ask for what you need. And don't take no for an answer. This might sound a little bit risky, but I'm serious, and the risk is well worth the reward. Your supervisor should make time for you, and you might be able to help them make time to fit you in. So here are a couple of tips that I have about how to go about this. First, strategize and prioritize. Make sure you're spending your precious time with your supervisor on your top priorities. Also, you should take charge of these meetings. Bring an agenda and start with your agenda items. Also, make sure to solicit clear expectations and priorities. Most supervisors don't spell out their expectations, and the burden of discovery falls upon those below them. Don't wait for your supervisor to provide you with this information. Instead, initiate a series of informal discussions on, let's say, our objectives or your vision. This can help your supervisor clarify and communicate his or her ideas. You can also make sure that you communicate your own ideas as well. Next, provide adequate information. Information is power, and a poorly informed supervisor can't advocate for your needs or make the best decisions for your project or for the organization. I also recommend coming to your supervisor with solutions and not problems. You may not know all the answers, but coming with a few solutions to a challenge you're facing will show them that you've thought through the problem, and they'll likely be more willing and able to help you brainstorm additional options and help you implement the solution. Also, be sure to relay good and bad news and don't surprise your supervisor. Remember that your supervisor has a supervisor too, and that they're responsible to that person. As a manager, it doesn't feel good to have your boss tell you about a mistake or even sometimes good news about their team if that's the first time they've heard about it. This kind of thing makes managers feel disconnected and vulnerable, so don't put your supervisor in this situation. Make sure they know about everything that's happening with your project, good and not so good. Another really great tip is to match your communication method with their preference. Do they prefer email, Skype, in-person, texting, walking meetings in between other meetings? Varying your communication method can be a great way to snag time with your supervisor if they can't sit down with you for 30 minutes at a time. If you need to talk to them, send them an informational email in the morning and then walk them to an afternoon meeting and get the information you need from them. Finally, follow up after you have a conversation to check for understanding and make sure that you document who is doing what so that everyone's accountable. Clear communication is also just a great way to build trust with your supervisor. If you communicate well, they know what they can expect from you, and they know that you're making every attempt to make sure they have all the information they need to be successful themselves. A great tool for facilitating communication is the one-on-one meeting. We'll discuss one-on-one best practices in just a minute, but if you're not already having formal one-on-ones with your supervisor, I highly recommend asking for this time with them. It's a great opportunity to update your supervisor on your project, learn about their agenda, and build your relationship. Okay, so another challenge. Help, I have 12 supervisors. This is another issue that we hear from VISTAs a lot. So maybe it's not 12, but more than one, which can sometimes feel like too many, and this can be a real challenge. Even if you have 2 awesome supervisors, expectations may collide or mismatch. Even if you have 2, they may not be communicating with each other if you have 2, or they may both think that they're your number 1 supervisor and that their assignment should take priority, because who doesn't think that? So what can you do to work within this situation? Well, I recommend frequent communication and documentation to follow up to make sure everyone's on the same page. This might look like copying all of your supervisors on an informational or project-specific email, keeping great meeting notes and perhaps storing them electronically where everyone can access them, or maybe emailing meeting notes out to all of your supervisors. Also, you can always ask them to talk to each other. It's totally okay to discuss the concerns you have about feeling pulled in different directions or about having conflicting priorities. If this is the case, it's likely your supervisors just don't realize that this is happening, and hopefully they'll take steps together to figure it out. Also, the positive spin on this is that now you have more mentors. You have a larger network and several potentially excellent references. So it's possible that having more than one supervisor will turn out to be a great opportunity, especially as you finish out your VISTA year and are looking forward to what's next. So we just discussed 2 challenges, busy supervisors and multiple supervisors, which are typically at the top of the list for VISTAs. So considering how common these challenges are, let's pause for a moment to tap into our collective expertise. Have you experienced any of these challenges, and what would you suggest to VISTAs who are experiencing these challenges? Once again, please respond to this chat question. The question is, what advice do you have for VISTAs experiencing these challenges? Busy supervisors and multiple supervisors. Once again, please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure you send to all participants.
Great, so thanks, Lawrence. Creating time for a weekly meeting, yep, very, very helpful. And asking for a checklist and having SMART goals. And if I recall, SMART goals stands for?
It stands for a variety of things,
okay.
But, I mean, the acronym shakes out a little bit differently depending on who you ask, but it's basically specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely.
Yeah, measurable, realistic goals. Go to the supervisor one-on-one, take initiative, weekly meetings with a clear agenda, time management, always ask for clarification, that's a huge one.
These are awesome suggestions, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of these themes for sure.
Whiteboard your outlining your priorities,
nice.
So you can refer back to them when you have meetings. That's a good one. Keep everyone on track. A practical schedule. Yep, that's a skill I think that takes time to develop. Being able to tell if what you've planned is realistic. Great. For busy supervisor, ask them if they have time to check in each day or twice a week. So, yep, again, advocating for that check-in time. Taking notes on a Google Doc so that everyone can have access to it. That's great. Great tip. Great.
Cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate everyone's willingness to share advice. Oftentimes, I think the best advice comes from folks who've had similar situations, so I really appreciate that the folks who volunteered to share their thoughts. Makes it a more rich and robust discussion. Okay, so let's move on to some of the trickier situations. What happens if you are intimidated by your supervisor, or maybe you perceive them as grumpy, brash, or just plain scary? All right, so now what? All right, so start by checking on what assumptions you might be making about your supervisor. How you're perceiving them may not be the way they're intending to come across. One of my VISTAs once told me that she thought I was intimidating when she first met me, and it blew my mind. I had no idea that other people might find me intimidating. So maybe your supervisor doesn't either. Or maybe they just have a really direct communication style that makes them seem insensitive. Or maybe they're not a morning person. Our list of what-ifs could go on, but I'm really just asking you to check in and see if your idea about them is accurate. Do other people see them this way? Check your impression with your coworkers. The other folks who work with you are your allies and can be excellent interpreters regarding communication styles, supervisor pet peeves, and general office culture. Also, consider whether you're basing your opinion on one particularly memorable interaction with your supervisor. Maybe you caught them on a bad day at the wrong time. Maybe you said the wrong thing at the wrong moment on accident. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about other people and their interactions or their intentions are not always correct or not always complete when we start to question how we got to that conclusion. On a related note, knowing your supervisor's hot buttons means that you can avoid stepping in it unintentionally. For example, a former supervisor of mine really disliked complaining, and it took me a while to understand that what I felt was therapeutic venting and self-expression really pushed her buttons. She felt like complaining wasn't productive and would rather spend energy focusing on what we could actually control and influence, which is totally reasonable. And once I figured this out, our relationship significantly improved. This is a managing up challenge that a lot of managers in my classes struggle with as well. I regularly hear them say things like, well, this is good advice, but how can I find out what my supervisor's hot buttons are? And my response is often, well, have you tried asking? This strategy tends to make people pretty nervous, but it's really the easiest way to get the information you need. You might say something like, what's your biggest pet peeve at work? Or what advice do you have for me to avoid irritating you? Those things might sound a little bit direct, but I think you should ask in a way that makes sense for your relationship with your supervisor. And I'm also here to tell you that just asking isn't that big of a deal. The worst thing that can happen is that maybe they don't know off the top of their head, or they say they don't have any hot buttons, which if they're a human person is likely untrue, but it's likely that they may just not prefer to tell this information as well, and that's okay, but asking certainly doesn't hurt. As a manager, I've been asked this question, and as someone who tells people that they should ask it, I was a little caught off guard and thought, oh, I'll have to think about that, but I certainly do have hot buttons as a manager. However, if you hit a brick wall, you can always rely on your coworkers to help you figure this out. And usually just being observant will probably get you most of the answers you need for overcoming this particular challenge. Another suggestion for dealing with an intimidating supervisor is to seek out feedback. This can be scary in and of itself, but it's a huge opportunity to better understand how your supervisor perceives you. Don't wait for an appraisal period to find out your supervisor's opinion of you and your work. If you get bad or constructive feedback, discuss your concerns, but try to do it on a mature level, not emotionally or confrontationally, which can be hard if you are in an having an emotional reaction to the feedback that you did get. But really it's about trying to understand the feedback that you're getting and why. One-on-one meetings are also a great forum for requesting feedback, and making this a regular part of these meetings creates a space for feedback to become a regular component of your VISTA supervisor relationship, which also tends to make it a little bit less scary. Also, if you're not getting the feedback that's specific enough for you to act upon, I encourage you to ask clarifying questions like, what would you like to see in the future? or what specifically would you like me to change? Or how do you recommend I approach this differently next time? Then be sure to listen to what your supervisor says and as much as possible try to act on it. It's also okay to ask for help. One of your supervisor's responsibilities is to help you remove barriers so that you can be successful. I also encourage you to give feedback to your supervisor as well. Let them know if you need something that they're not providing, and give them positive feedback and appreciation when they do something that's helpful to you. Everyone needs feedback, even supervisors. Feedback is a great relationship building tool, and once you've gotten more comfortable with your supervisor, you just might be able to let them know that sometimes they can come across as scary. Okay, so another common managing up challenge is when supervisors take the no news is good news approach, which basically means that they only communicate if there's a problem. If this is you or this is something you're experiencing, you are absolutely not alone. And unfortunately, this is a popular but less than effective management technique. Mostly this happens because supervisors are very busy, or because they try to avoid giving constructive feedback because they don't want to hurt people's feelings, or because they're trying to avoid micromanaging and they've swung to the other side of the spectrum to totally hands-off. Or it could be because you're awesome and they feel like you don't need a lot of coaching. Regardless of the reason, at best this management method is exasperating, and at worst it can create a culture where we all walk around on eggshells trying not to attract the supervisor's attention because it means we're in some sort of trouble. However, don't despair. You can counter this tactic by being visible, by asking a lot of questions, and by working to build a professional relationship with your supervisor. Many of the strategies that work for a busy boss work with the no news is good news supervisor too. These include catching their attention during in-between times, grabbing coffee before a meeting, or walking and talking along the way. Using the time on a car trip as a relationship building opportunity or snagging a few minutes of their time after an all-staff meeting are great options as well. By taking advantage of these in-between moments, you can actually get a lot of the information you need to get your work done. Also, make sure to use these few moments strategically by prioritizing the questions you have and by asking for feedback on specific issues. This time may be precious, so make sure you're getting exactly what you need from it. Last but not least, asking your supervisor about themselves and their job can help draw them out so that they'll be more forthcoming with both positive and constructive feedback. This is just a good relationship building tool for almost any situation, and people generally like to talk about themselves, so use this to your advantage. People are much more likely to help those with whom they have a relationship and who they feel genuinely care about them. And while you're at it, tell your supervisor a little bit about yourself too. Okay, the no boundaries supervisor. This was one of the challenges that we heard a lot about, or we have heard a lot about in several past webinars, and so wanted to be really thoughtful about addressing this for the folks that this is coming up for, because it, to be honest, is one of the hardest things to manage because it can be so uncomfortable. But we've all been there. We've all had a supervisor, colleague, acquaintance, or maybe even a friend that has shared something with us that felt like a boundary violation. Maybe we've even done it ourselves. To err is human, and so is the overshare. So if you've got a supervisor who's regularly sharing too much about their personal life, their politics, or their religious views, it can get awkward fast. In fact, I think this is one of the fastest ways for supervisors to lose trust and to create a destructive or toxic work environment. Typically, though, there's hope for helping someone recognize the impact of this behavior. For these kinds of tricky situations, I find it's helpful to have a formula to follow to provide meaningful feedback. There are a lot of variations out there, but I like to recommend the COIN conversation model. First, make a connection by pointing out that you care about them, which is why you need to address this issue. Do this in the moment if possible. This way you can provide your observation about the specific, factual examples of exactly what was said or done that's making you cringe. Then, describe how their behavior is impacting you. Finally, suggest or ask for their ideas on what could be done differently next time. For example, you might say, I care about your happiness and I'm glad that you feel you can trust me. However, when you tell me about your Tinder profile, it really makes me uncomfortable and I feel like it interferes with our professional relationship. I really want to get to know you, but that's a little too personal. I would love to hear more about your kids or your hobbies. How about we start there? So be direct, be specific, and be clear about what behavior should stop, and use what you already know about them to show that you care and to suggest other more appropriate topics. Many times people overshare because they're trying to relate to others. They're trying to be accessible and appear more human. They may even be trying to seem cool. I have a lot of supervisors in class who say things like, I just want people to like me. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior often backfires, especially when it's a supervisor and there's a power hierarchy there. However, it's likely that this person just doesn't know how they're coming across, and having someone point out in the moment, this behavior in the moment will be enough to shine a light on how their behavior is impacting the people around them. With any luck, you will come across as professional and kind, and they will be suitably horrified and apologetic. So now we're going to transition from managing up challenges and talk about a specific intervention that I've already mentioned a couple of times during this presentation, which is the one-on-one meeting. This, in my opinion, is one of the best options for building a productive VISTA supervisor relationship. Before we jump into talking about one-on-one best practices using a tool that I love, I really want to get a sense of how many of you are currently having one-on-ones with your supervisor. So please answer the poll questions on the right side of the screen. And your options are, so the question is, do you have regular one-on-ones with your direct supervisor? The options are, yes, we meet but not regularly, I rarely meet with my supervisor, I never meet with my supervisor, and what's a one-on-one meeting? So take this opportunity to answer the poll.
Okay, so we'll just let those responses come in, and then we'll be closing that pretty soon. Let the results tabulate. We're always really fascinated by this poll because, as we've said before, this is something supervisors are required to do, and yet we find there is still a portion of VISTAs and supervisors that are not having regularly scheduled one-on-ones. So we're going to see where this group lands. Okay, we've got most, oh, that's good. Got two, what's a one-on-one meeting? We'll talk about this a little more in depth, but it's good to see we have most folks at yes, or we meet but not regularly, which hopefully we can get that changed. Let's go do it.
All right. So just like Jessica mentioned, I do want to acknowledge that I know all of you are supposed to be having one-on-one meetings with your supervisor and that this is a VISTA requirement. However, I also want to acknowledge that what we're supposed to do isn't what we always do, and it isn't always possible, and sometimes it isn't the best thing to do. Being required doesn't mean it's realistic or relevant. I also teach this stuff. I teach one-on-ones to my supervisors in class, and now I'm a supervisor, and it's challenging to make time for them. So just from the supervisor side of things, I know what the best practice is. I teach it. I know the theory, and I am still challenged by it. So it doesn't mean it's not a good use of time, and it doesn't mean that I am off the hook or that your supervisor is off the hook for meeting with you. I just want to recognize that life gets in the way of our best intentions sometimes. So this being said, let's spend a moment talking about one-on-ones because I think it's one of your best resources for getting the attention you need from your supervisor. And it's one of the things that you can ask for, easily set up, and lead without asking too much from your supervisor. So best practices for ensuring successful one-on-one meetings are as follows. One-on-one meetings should be held weekly or as often as possible for 30 minutes. They should be scheduled at a regular, consistent time and are rarely missed. In addition, the primary focus for the one-on-one meeting is you, the VISTA, and you should always make sure to take great notes and follow up on action items. I want to be sure to mention that the tool that's linked on this slide is geared towards managers. meaning that it's intended for supervisors to use during a one-on-one meeting with their employees or with their VISTAs. However, the one-on-one meeting approach is easily transformed or turned around so that it can be used by the person who's being managed during a one-on-one. In fact, my supervisor and I both use this tool and bring our own copies to our one-on-ones, and I do the same thing with all of the folks that I supervise. So let's dive into this actual one-on-one meeting approach. And this approach describes how time during this meeting should be spent. So the premise of the one-on-one meeting is called the 10-10-10 approach. This means that the 30-minute meeting is broken down into 3 10-minute sections. And if you're looking at the tool or you look at it later, you'll be able to see this for sure. The first 10-minute block is for you, the VISTA, and you're responsible for leading this part of the meeting. This means you bring the agenda items and you go first. This ensures that you get the time you need for your questions and have the space to inform your supervisor about successes, as well as any barriers you're facing. The second 10-minute block is for your supervisor's agenda items. One of the secrets of this model is that you going first during the first 10 minutes ensures that your supervisor won't monopolize the entire meeting with their stuff. However, because you went first, it's also likely that they've already checked off some of the items on their list because you've already addressed them. So they should get what they need during their 10 minutes for sure as well. The final 10 minutes are for your career development, personal and professional goal setting, and any other growth opportunities that you want to discuss. This is specifically set aside as an intentional part of the approach so that there's always time for these conversations. This may be where you talk about your mentorship, you talk about mentorship, you take a look at your resume, get connections from your supervisor for informational interviews, work on a stretch goal, etc. As such, hopefully this becomes a regular part of your VISTA supervisor interactions and is an ongoing discussion throughout your service year. This is also a great opportunity to continue to develop and strengthen your relationship with your supervisor. In addition to the one-on-one tool, the Manager Tools website also has several amazing podcasts that are really helpful if you're looking for more information on how to conduct and get the most out of these one-on-one meetings. The link to the website where you can find an editable one-on-one meeting document and the podcast is included in the resources section of this presentation. So if one-on-one meetings are at their heart about relationship building, let's discuss some of the questions you can use to engage your supervisor in the one-on-one conversation. Here are a few relationship building and expectation setting questions that may help you think about what kinds of questions you'd like to ask your supervisor. What's your preferred mode of communication? This ties back to several of our common challenges, and getting this information up front can go a long way towards making sure you're communicating well as getting what you need from your supervisor. What are your expectations of this project? Try to get specifics by asking about timelines, deadlines, project partners, and what you should do if you run into a problem. What can I handle on my own, and what needs your approval? This is a great question to know because it can be a huge time saver for you to move your project along. It's also just a great clarifying question about span of control and authority. How often would you like status updates on this project? Ask this and then provide status updates on schedule. This will help you build credibility with your supervisor, and if they say they don't really need status updates, I highly encourage you to take initiative and provide them anyway. What are your top priorities for this project? This question shows that you care about alignment and that you're interested in helping your supervisor meet their goals in addition to your own. Understanding your supervisor's agenda also means that you can align your tasks and project with that agenda in order to move both your goals forward. It also means that your supervisor is more likely to advocate for you and will see you as a trusted ally. Okay, so we know that a year of service as a VISTA member is not without its challenges, and we want to encourage you to tap into your resources for support, which includes CNCS, and a variety of other VISTA resources. So Jessica and I are going to spend the next few minutes talking about some of the resources available to you at your site, at your VISTA program, and at the Corporation for National and Community Service. So let's talk about what to do if you have a really, really tough supervisor situation. First, I want to give a shout out to the support services offered by VISTA at your site and on your team. My fellow VISTAs during my 2 years of service were a great source of support and camaraderie. I encourage you to ask your fellow service members what's working well for them and tap into the resources of your peers all over the country through the VISTA Campus Forum. If you're one of those VISTAs without a VISTA team, definitely use the VISTA Campus to connect to your fellow VISTA members, because folks all over the country are may be experiencing similar challenges and may really have great advice for you. Likewise, your coworkers can be an amazing support and assistance. They have a history at the project and at the organization and can give a firsthand account of what it's like to work at the organization that you're serving with. They also will probably have tips on how to succeed and thrive there. A few coffee dates with coworkers can go a long way towards making your service year awesome. Furthermore, your supervisor's supervisor may also be a resource and source of support for you. This can be tricky because, like I mentioned earlier, you typically want to avoid going over your supervisor's head when issues arise. But if you really need help and you feel like you've hit a wall and with all the other resources at your site, you can certainly reach out to a higher level in the organization to see if they have advice for you. Finally, I want to acknowledge that bad bosses are a fact of life. They exist in almost every organization. There is a mountain of research and literature devoted to analyzing and understanding them. And there are people like me whose jobs revolve around preventing, diagnosing, and curing bad bosses. And yet, they persist. So, what can you do about it? You can learn from them, and you can vow not to be like them. Some of our best learning opportunities come from failure, even when it's someone else who's failing. So take this opportunity to study up on what a bad boss looks like and sounds like, and don't be like that. I've had some terrible bosses who taught me to be a great employee. My scary bosses made me empathetic. My busy bosses made me resourceful. My bad communicator bosses made me articulate. My 1 million bosses made me organized. And my no boundaries bosses made me shrewd. My point is, they all made me better. It was hard, but I learned a lot, and I wouldn't be where I am today without them. So seize the bad boss opportunity and learn what you can from them. It won't last forever. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica to discuss some of the ways that VISTA and CNCS can be helpful to you in those extra tough situations, as well as to sum up what we've covered so far. Jess?
Great. Thanks so much, Signa. Yeah, so as we've talked about a lot today, managing up has to do with, building your skills and ability to advocate for yourself and to improve communication with your supervisor. But there are some situations and times where it really is appropriate for you to reach out and get some support beyond your supervisor. We mentioned VISTA leaders. Not everyone has access to a VISTA leader, but if you do, that's a great resource to kind of serve as a liaison and facilitator or mediator for some difficult conversations. And then beyond that, if you are truly experiencing harassment or bullying or unprofessional conduct, that is absolutely an instance where you want to connect with your state office. That's what they're there for. Also, if there are circumstances happening where you can't get decisions made on something for your project, or your supervisor is truly not available after you have attempted to work with them on that, basically, if you're not able, if something in the situation is preventing you from having a successful VISTA service experience, yeah, again, that's an opportunity where it would be appropriate to reach out to your state office. So again, if there's no sense of direction or supervision, if your VAD tasks are not real, or if they're not capacity building, if you're just being used to staff the office, that's not an appropriate use of VISTA time. And again, if you experience hostile staff members or harassment or discrimination, absolutely, we want you to reach out to the state office. So just to recap some of our resources that we've shared, we have some templates for the one-on-one meetings, some articles about managing up, and that COIN conversation model. And the links to these resources, as well as the slides, will be posted on the VISTA campus, and we'll try to get that posted today, so that you can have access to those links immediately. So as we begin to wrap up, we have covered a lot of different topics and addressed a lot of different situations, but we'd just like to have you take a moment to reflect and maybe share what's one thing from today's presentation that you want to try and put in practice. We've got the COIN method. That was, again, a method for giving feedback, especially in tough or maybe emotionally charged situations. We've got the 10-10-10 model, great model for one-on-one meetings to make sure you are getting your needs met and hearing your supervisors and doing it in a quick, timely manner. 10-10-10, meeting at least once a week, implementing a mutually agreed upon timeline. Great. Learning about your supervisor's hot buttons, asking for more clarification. Yeah, that's great. What can you handle on your own versus what needs approval? That's really, really important, understanding that decision-making process. Being clear about expectations. Yeah, again, these are just, it's all about advocating and making sure that you have a shared understanding and that they may not know what you don't have or what you need. So it's, yeah, so lifelong skill.
For sure. I'm glad to see that the tips we talked about in this presentation are going to be useful for folks and are something you can apply today and in your career beyond. So glad to see that.
So feel free to keep thinking of those. And before we dive into a deeper Q&A session, we're going to open up a poll. And this is just an evaluation chance for you all to give us some input about today's presentation. We really appreciate this feedback and use it to improve future webinars. So you'll see that the poll on the right side of your screen. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, we'd appreciate it. And with that, we are going to head into our Q&A. I'm going to open up this Q&A panel. If you have questions for Cigna, please feel free to either write them in the Q&A box or you can dial in by phone. And can we have our operator remind us about how to ask a question by phone?
Yes, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw your question, press *2. Again, to ask a question over the phone, please press *1. It will take a few moments for questions to come through. Please stand by.
Great. So we'll wait a moment and see if we have any more questions. We did have one question previously. Rachel asked, how can I connect with other VISTA members on the VISTA campus? I don't have a VISTA team. So just wanted to remind everyone that on the VISTA campus, there is a forum with a lot of different threads on a whole variety of topics, from communication topics like this webinar to tips for ways to make meals on a budget, or tips for finding housing, things like that, free resources, free professional development. There's all sorts of stuff.
I got some great recipes from some of those threads on the VISTA campus when I was a member. It was awesome.
All right, we do have a question here. So Cigna, Mercedes, like to know how to work in a hostile environment that is not related and or caused by my project.
That's an interesting question. I feel like maybe I need a little more context around that because I'm wondering if it's sort of outside of your organization and there's maybe politics that are impacting your organization, or whether you have coworkers who are, or a boss or something who are in the organization but not related to your project. But my thought is, so I've been in this in this situation, as I'm sure many folks have experienced as well, is that there's sort of something happening on the periphery that, you know, is maybe not directly related to the work that you do, but still impacts it or impacts your emotional well-being. This is definitely a challenge. So my first piece of advice is figure out who your allies are. So, for example, I worked in a challenging organization a couple of jobs ago, and my direct supervisor, thankfully, was a huge source of support for me and someone who I could go to and vent with and cry on her shoulder, and she offered a huge amount of support. She was also willing to sort of be a barrier between me and some of the other challenging folks that I worked with. She was sort of in a liaison role and was super helpful in just helping me figure out how to be the most effective in a really challenging situation. But your coworkers can serve this role. I also really recommend, if you've got a challenging organization or maybe your supervisor is challenging for you to interact with or get attention from, there are lots of opportunities to get a mentor, whether that's, you know, through your VISTA program or a connection through that program, or just, you know, finding a professional through your network or through your extended network who you can connect with. And that person can be super helpful in helping you just brainstorm and think through problems, maybe do some role playing. And they can also, it's kind of nice because they're not in it, you know, with you, and so they don't have a stake necessarily, and so they can shed some light on their perspective and offer that, and also, you know, tell you when maybe you're contributing to that problem too. And so anyway, I don't want to say that that's the case here, but, you know, having that outside perspective can be super helpful. I hope that that is a helpful answer to that question. If you have additional information, we'd love to hear it.
And we've got another question here. So it sounds like it's a scenario. My supervisor will give me a task, and when I turn it into her, she'll redo it and then not commit to it and decide she doesn't need it at all, and then I have nothing to do. How do I handle this situation?
That's a tricky one. So it sounds like there's a couple of things happening. There's this sort of piece that's micromanagement, right? So your supervisor is taking what you've done and redoing it. There's also a piece around not committing that that's an actual sort of important piece of the project, and then maybe it doesn't go anywhere. So I think there's some clarification and some direct communication that can happen around that. I would be direct and tell this person what you're seeing. You know, give them an example. Say, you know, I turned in this project, I worked really hard on it, I, you know, see that you've made a lot of changes to it, and I'm happy to accept feedback on this. It's also, you know, I noticed that it's not going anywhere. I'm wanting to know what's happening there. So as much as possible and as much as you feel comfortable, I would check in and be direct and ask what's going on. One of the challenges with being a supervisor as well, and this comes up a lot in supervisory literature, and the supervisors themselves experience it and talk about it, is as a supervisor, one of your jobs is to get work done through other people. That's a huge shift in the way that supervisors have done work in their previous career. Most supervisors get promoted because they're high-performing individual contributors or they're high-performing employees, meaning that they're really productive, they get work done, and they produce awesome results. And when you become a supervisor, some of that gets taken away because other people should be doing that work. But I hear a lot of supervisors say things like, well, if I do it, I'll get it done the way I want it, or, you know, if I do it, I can do it better than anyone else because I've done that work before, or they won't do it the way I want it, or if I do it, it'll just be done faster and I don't have to train somebody. So some of it's a control piece, some of it's a satisfaction piece. A lot of supervisors don't always have work that they get to like check off at the end of the day. They don't necessarily have a product and say, you know, they can't go home and say, I accomplished this. They sort of have to say, I got work done through other people, which doesn't feel always all that satisfying. So it's a huge shift in that mindset. And I would encourage you, while you're having that conversation with this person, to dig a little bit deeper and ask some of those questions, but also just be a little bit thoughtful about, you know, they probably got promoted because they were super awesome and their work is shifting and they may be sort of clinging to work that they've done previously because it's meaningful or it's important to them, or they got a lot of accolades because of that. So that just may be something, just maybe some perspective that could be helpful in this situation as well. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, and I was just also thinking that if they're making a lot of changes, then perhaps they weren't being very clear about what they wanted to begin with. So for future, you could proactively be like, hey, can you be really clear about what you're looking for, because maybe they didn't kind of convey their vision enough. And I don't know if that's the case, but again, yes, taking a moment to advocate yourself and help them communicate better to you what they're looking for.
Yeah, and asking for status updates, asking for, you know, tell me about what success looks like for this project. Is this something that's, you know, set in stone? Is it something that's a little bit of a pilot? You know, so that you have some expectation too around like what's going to happen with this work that I do. Because it may be something that it's like we had this, we thought we were going to get this grant, and then we didn't get it, or we didn't get as much as we thought we were going to, and the project shrunk, or something. So anyway, there may be other things that either they're not communicating to you, or that are just happening at another level that that make it seem like this person is getting in the way when actually there's just organizational changes that are going on.
Great. Let's take a moment and check with our operator. Do we have any questions that have come in by phone?
There are no questions queuing at this time, but again, as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1.
Okay, great. Well, we have a few more questions in the Q&A. Joseph is curious. They say, the way I communicate tends to be passive. How do you start to communicate with your supervisor more direct?
Mm-hmm.
Such a skill. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's so hard, right? So I was writing an email the other day to someone I supervise, and I was my goal was to say, I expect you to be at this meeting on Friday. However, they're telecommuting on Friday. I approved it, which is great. But I also didn't want to have it come across, particularly in an email, as such a direct expectation. So it was a very simple email to send, but it was a very challenging email to write because I was trying to communicate my expectation while also leaving a little bit of room for this person to respond or to, I don't know, I have a sense that I wasn't trying to micromanage them. So, you know, clarity is really important, and communicating in the way that it's going to be well received and someone can hear it is also really important. So anyway, that is just one example of, I think, sort of that balance, right? Because you're going for clarity, but you also are wanting to make it so that the other person can hear what you're saying. I think, and I'd recommend, if you feel comfortable, having a conversation about your communication style with your supervisor can be really helpful. And you may have a couple of examples in your back pocket where you say, you know, we had this conversation. My understanding was that we came to this agreement. and that didn't work out the way I thought. Was that your understanding? So I think that's helpful too. I think also checking for understanding after a meeting or after a one-on-one to say, okay, so I'm going to do this and you're going to do this. Is that what's going to happen? Can be really helpful and can be a direct way of communicating, but can also come across as, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting you what you need. So it can come across as helpful, I think. But I think having a conversation about communication styles can be so helpful. So helping that person understand how you communicate, and it can also trigger them to be able to say, okay, so Joseph is an indirect communicator, or he has a passive style. Do I really understand what he's saying? And I have a few employees who have different communication styles than I do, and so I do a lot of question asking to make sure that I'm really getting to the heart of what they're saying. And so helping your supervisor understand that that's helpful for you, I think, can be really helpful for them to be able to interact with you more effectively. So it's definitely a collaboration, but I think as honest as you can be about some of the things you've experienced or provide some examples can be really helpful in just letting your supervisor know what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, that's great. I would, definitely reiterate just acknowledging it, talking to your supervisor and saying, hey, you know what, I recognize I have more of a direct or passive communication style. That's what I feel comfortable with, which can be the better way to go in many situations too. So acknowledging that sometimes that passive communication style can be an advantage, but maybe saying that you would like, that's something you want to work on as a professional development goal for the year is taking a more direct or assertive communication style, and that you want to let your supervisor know that, and so they'll be aware and can maybe help you or give you feedback.
Also, too, VISTA is a great opportunity, a great time to try on different techniques, to try on being more direct, or to try on maybe pulling back on some of the directness if you tend to be a really direct communicator. It's an opportunity to be flexible and to really learn about professional styles, and it's a great place to kind of observe sort of how your coworkers are, what your organizational culture is like, and to try to adapt, and because that's only going to serve you in your future career, because we all have to do that in any organization we join, and VISTA is a really nice, I think, playground for organizational psychology experiments, if you will.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's see, we have another question here from Michael. What should I do if I'm not getting any feedback, direction, or tasks that I've reached out to my supervisor and their supervisor? I've had no onboarding or training and have no idea what I should be doing. Yikes. That sounds very frustrating.
It does.
And that should not be the case. I think you should definitely, I'm sure you have, but really stress that you'd appreciate or need some official onboarding and training. They're absolutely supposed to give you an OSAT on-site orientation and training, and there are numerous resources on the VISTA campus in the supervisor section. There's an entire curriculum that they can draw from. But yeah, you should, if that is not reconciled, that's a question for the state office.
For sure. I would absolutely echo that and say that I wouldn't hesitate. Probably at this point, it sounds like you've communicated a lot. Maybe give it one more shot, but this is an opportunity to reach out to your VISTA leader, to reach out to your state office or your program, to really communicate with them what's happening at your site. You know, VISTA is a grant of human capital, and if your site, if any of your sites aren't utilizing you appropriately or effectively, VISTA needs to know about that, because they have limited resources as well, and they want to give them to the organizations that are really going to capitalize on that opportunity. And also, you know, this is supposed to be a development opportunity for you all, right? You're giving of your time, you're volunteering to do this work, and if it's not a good use of your time, they need to know about that so that they can either reassign you or you know, make those expectations really clear with your site. And I have seen sites who were a little bit confused about VISTA or maybe didn't have the clearest VAD to start out with, or the project changed unexpectedly. I have seen those sites turn around, so sometimes it may be really worth it to get the state office involved because your site just isn't quite getting the message, and the state office can make that super clear for them.
Great. So, okay, question from Ronald. What do you do when you've been done with your VAD for months, you've asked for something to do, but keep getting tossed aside? Ooh, wow, this sounds like a question for the state office.
Agreed.
Your VAD should have been developed with a full year's worth of work, and if you have already completed it, and then it sounds like the scope of your project needs to be discussed with the state office. You should not be getting tossed aside. You should be continuing to build capacity and your own professional development. So, you could advocate for yourself and say just that. And if it's not reconciled, then that's a question for the state office.
For sure. I would echo that 100%.
Okay. Salam, I'm sorry if that is not the right pronunciation. We've got a question. Can AmeriCorps consider quarterly or yearly trainings for supervisors as a part of agency participation? They do. Supervisors do, although I believe they all go to new supervisor training, but there may not be ongoing. So that's a great question that we can pass along to the VISTA training powers at B.
I will say too, you know, as a leadership trainer or someone who does work with supervisors, this stuff it makes intuitive sense. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about makes intuitive sense. For example, conducting one-on-one. It's of course, I want to sit down with my employees every week, once a week, for 30 minutes at least to know what's going on with them and understand their projects. And I have my own work to do, things get in the way, you know, there's periodic crises that come up that we need to all deal with, and so sometimes those things get missed. So my point is that sometimes supervisor training, like we all know what the best practices are, but things get in the way, or, you know, training isn't always the solution to some of these challenges as well. So, you know, we can walk in the room, give supervisors all the best tools, and sometimes it just doesn't take. and that's challenging for you, and it's something I think to note that just because a supervisor wins a training doesn't mean they're going to be a good supervisor. And so if you're having those kinds of challenges, again, I highly suggest getting in touch with your leader if you've got one, with your program if you have one, and also with your state office. Because those folks need to know that. And I have seen supervisors, you know, VISTAs get reassigned within their site as well because there was a supervisor there who was just ineffective. So not that that's to say that this is your case, and we'll, you know, assume the best of intentions of your supervisor, but, you know, as much as possible, be really clear and communicate with that person, and then definitely escalate if you're not getting what you need.
Great, thanks. Okay, a resource question. Arlise asks, what are some websites to know what your communication style is? And there's so many models and personality inventory kind of things out there.
Totally.
We may have to follow up after, but Signa has some ideas.
Yeah. So rather than suggesting specific websites, I have a couple of models off the top of my head that come to mind. One of them is Myers-Briggs. It's commonly known as the MBTI. That's a really common sort of personality assessment. It also addresses communication. There's also DISC. It's D-I-S-C. It's a model from the Wiley Corporation, and that one actually specifically talks about communication styles. But if you just Google, like put into Google communication styles, you'll come up with a variety of different options and models to choose from. There are some that are more well-researched than others, so MBTI, of course, and DISC are both well-researched. But I would say conducting some of your own just internet research will be fruitful for you in terms of thinking about what the options are for articulating communication styles, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what model you choose. It's about kind of having a language to talk about that. So I highly encourage you to check that out. And then also, this may be something to request if you do have a VISTA leader or in-service trainings that you do throughout the service year. This may be something to request of them, and as a training opportunity, there may also be resources on the VISTA campus. So I would definitely check there as well.
Yeah, there are a few resources, especially relating to indirect versus direct communication. But yeah, I think some of those models you mentioned are great. And yeah, Googling, there's a ton of resources out there. And I think it was a really good point and good to remember that there are so many models and that it's important not to use one and then like pigeonhole yourself. It's really a tool to think about communication and how other people communicate, but not necessarily to look at something and assign a coworker or someone you know and be like, yeah, that's totally them, and move forward to sort of pigeonholing people. That can be helpful, but it's a great way to sort of think about communication in general. Okay. So Abigail has a scenario question. Oops, my screen just jumped. Get this. Upper management, not my supervisor, is trying to give me tasks that are not in my bag. If I do not take on the task, it is then given to my supervisor, who already has too much to do, and I struggle with wanting to focus my time on my project, but not add stress to my supervisor. Ah, wow.
That's so nice. It's really nice that you're concerned about your supervisor, and I'm sure that person appreciates that. But at the end of the day, that's their job. I mean, I totally hear you that there's some potential guilt there. There's some, feelings of that they're being overwhelmed, but you have a very specific project at your organization, and you're there to do that and not to do stuff that, the executive director or other leadership folks want you to do. And it's your supervisor's job to protect you in that way. Hopefully, your supervisor feels empowered or is able to advocate for themselves and is also able to explain what your role really is so that you don't get asked to do these kinds of additional tasks or additional work. This is a really common thing that happens in organizations is, there's not maybe some important communication doesn't happen when an organization applies for a VISTA grant and your supervisor applies for that. You get this extra capacity. They're able to bring on a VISTA and supervise that person, but there are other folks in the organization who don't understand what the VISTA is really there to do. So hopefully this is an opportunity for your supervisor to clarify that. But also at the end of the day, it's their job to protect you from inappropriate work. And it sounds like your supervisor is willing to do that, and so I would be grateful and thank them and be super appreciative that they are willing to do that for you. But don't feel bad about not, as much as possible, don't feel bad about not taking that on because it's not for you to do, and you do need to focus on your project, and that's why you're there.
Good reminder. Okay, we have two questions on a really important topic. They're sort of both questions asking essentially the same thing. I'm just going to read one of them now. So, Signet, how do you recommend having a conversation about your personal mental health with your supervisor?
That's a tricky one. I'm not sure I have a a great answer for that, because it's really your decision to disclose something like that to your supervisor, and it's certainly not something that you have to do. It's totally up to you, because that is your personal health and that's private. You do, however, have some protections around some of that stuff too. So if you do need to take time off, or you have need to request a reasonable accommodation, those are absolutely things that you can tap into, and I would definitely talk to your state office or if you have a leader or a program director, talk to someone at VISTA about what those resources are, because then you can present that to your supervisor, or they can even maybe, your state office support can maybe even help you have that conversation with your supervisor. But again, it's not something that if you feel uncomfortable, that you need to disclose to them. There are protected leave scenarios where supervisors and managers will just get, a notification that this person needs something specific and it's a reasonable accommodation, and they just have to comply. So it's totally up to you. If you really trust your supervisor and you have a really great working relationship and you feel comfortable disclosing that, it's totally up to you, and that's your decision. But I would not feel pressure to do that. And if you need resources, please reach out to your VISTA supervisor or your state office, your leader, or your program director, because they can help clue you into some of that stuff as well. Jess, do you want to add anything to that?
I guess, I don't know, maybe this is personal, but I had this situation in my own VISTA, it was not a VISTA, but I did serve a year of AmeriCorps service with a state and national project, and I don't know, I think some of it comes down to your relationship with your supervisor. As we're saying, if you feel comfortable. In my case, I felt comfortable. We had a very small team. I was essentially the only person working by myself in this small office, and it just was not a good fit for me and kind of exacerbated some anxiety issues. So in that situation, I felt comfortable talking about it, and we kind of worked through some accommodations, some changes to where I could work in a different space, get more interaction with partners and clients and outside folks. So that was how we dealt with that, is sort of thinking through how to make the work environment better based on what I was feeling and experiencing at that time. But again, that's very circumstantial. So I would, suggest that you be really clear on what it is that you need for yourself and what's going on with yourself. And if there are resources you think your supervisor can provide, and you feel comfortable, then go ahead and share that with them. Andy, another situational question. I'm on perpetual hold on VAD items due to supervisors' desire to limit partnerships and capacity building. Let's see, to select a group of people who agree and further political and social agendas. Appears my VAD is a means to other ends. Interesting. I might need more.
So it sounds like your supervisor is utilizing your VAD as an opportunity to make strategic partnerships, to reward particular collaborators or collaborations, to sort of further their or the organization's political agenda. That's my interpretation. So once again, this is one of those things that you should contact your state office or your VISTA leader or your program director ASAP. If you have specific examples of this or things that you can sort of point to as that can highlight the challenges that you're experiencing, that's going to be more helpful to your state office. But any time that you're not doing the projects that are outlined on your VAD or the responsibilities of your VAD, that's a conversation to have with the state office, because they will absolutely back you up and will be able to have those challenging conversations with your site about what's appropriate. And this particular example sounds like your organization and your supervisor would really benefit from that conversation. So I'm glad to hear, Andy, that it sounds like we got the gist of what you meant in terms of this conversation or this question. But yeah, reach out to your state office because this sounds like an inappropriate use of VISTA resources.
Absolutely. Let's see, we're approaching the end of our Q&A and session, but let me just check with the operator. Do we have any additional questions that have come in through the phone?
No, no questions at this time.
Great. Well, we've reached the end of our Q&A questions. So I'd like to thank Cigna so much for joining us on this session, and we'll just close by sharing the next upcoming webinar. In September, we're going to have a session called Maximizing Your VISTA Healthcare Benefits. That is going to focus on clarifying the VISTA Healthcare benefits and going into how you can enroll for those if you haven't already, and then addressing a little bit about how you can use your benefits. So that'll be September 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And again, this presentation, the materials, and a recording will be posted on the VISTA campus in about a week. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm so glad to be able to talk to VISTAs.